I'll introduce Sian first, and then she'll introduce the rest of the panellists. Sian basically, as I said, very kindly stepped in for Jane at very short notice. We're very grateful for that. Sian was one of the very early leaders in establishing the UK disability arts movement, and then went on to work in the disability media, television, print and radio presenting, where she directed and produced programmes and documentaries on the full range of disability issues and culture during the 1980s and 90s. She then worked for the National Centre for Independent Living and went on to work as a director for a Centre for Independent Living in London, building it almost from scratch into a thriving small voluntary sector organisation and an effective local voice for disabled people, and she was awarded an OBE for those achievements in 2009. So I'll pass you over to your chair, Sian Vasey.
Thank you very much, Ian, and it's such a pleasure to be here for question time here in Southampton. Gosh. And I'm just aware my mic's not on and I can't press the button. It's not green. Well, as I say, it is fantastic to be here in Southampton today, and I think, I just want to say, and I don't know whether I'm allowed to say this, but I think Spectrum is a phenomenal organisation, and I really do just want to say congratulations to Ian for everything he does. I think he's an outstanding director, and I really think, you know, a moment's appreciation for Ian is well in order. So if we could just give him a big round of applause. Thank you. Great. No, you deserve it. Now what we're doing question time today. It's we're going to be thinking creatively, we're going to be getting some answers, we're going to be getting through some of the worries that people have about the future and thinking about the way forward. So, and we have a marvellous panel of disabled people who are going to be taking your questions and giving you their wisdom and thoughts and ideas. So, before we actually go to the questions, each panel member is going to be giving a presentation, so you can learn more about what they think and where they're coming from, and giving you the benefit of their experience. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from this end of the table. They are a little bit squashed up there, and do say if we can't breathe or anything. But I think that'd be good. John Evans is our first panel member. He is known to everybody in this room. I think anybody who doesn't know him should be ashamed of themselves. So, can I ask John, who is a disability rights and diversity consultant currently, if he would like to kick off with his presentation. Thank you, John.
Yeah, no, I'm also really pleased to, be able to make a brief presentation here, because I wasn't one of the people that set up Southampton CIL at the beginning, but I did know all the original people then, so it's something very close to my heart. Anyway, I've been asked to say something about the current assessment of independent living and the threats. We find ourselves in 2014 at a crossroads in independent living. This is hard to believe, particularly as independent living has probably been one of the most significant and positive life-changing developments for disabled people. Our current government has created a deadlock situation for independent living with its intention to close the Independent Living Fund. Its intention to do this is really hard to understand. Ironically, this does not even match up to its social care policy agenda, promoting personalisation and personal budgets. There would not be any personalisation or personal budgets without independent living, as both personal budgets and personalisation are based on control and choice, which were the original two principles of independent living. In order to come to a kind of an assessment of independent living today, it's worth reflecting politically on how we got to where we are after 30 years, mainly because of the efforts and the the creativity and the hard work of disabled people. But let's look at it in terms of political terms. We had a Conservative government that brought in the Independent Living Fund, believe it or not, in 1988, the Community Care Act in 1990, the Disability Discrimination Act in 1995, and direct payments legislation in 1996, which all supported a legislative and policy framework for independent living to prosper. This was thanks to all the groundwork that went beforehand and the creativity of disabled people who came up with all those ideas and developed it. Then they were followed by the Labour government that came in, that built upon this by bringing in the important Life Chances report in 2005, which recommended developing centres for independent living or user-led organisations at every local authority, and the whole personalisation agenda. This then followed Putting People First in 2007 and the significant independent living strategy of 2008, which all went further supporting independent living developments. Again, this would not have happened without the expertise of disabled people working with the government in developing this. It's not surprising with this background and the policy legislative framework, we were viewed upon by disabled people in Europe with envy. Sadly, following the austerity period and with its cuts in budgets, benefits and services, this has now changed, and we're trying to find new ways of overcoming all the threats to independent living for its very survival. How do we move forward from this? I think we start by looking at a quote from the All-Party Joint Committee on Human Rights when they came out with the findings from their report in 2012 after an investigation into the government's position on independent living. The report said, "We are concerned to learn that the right of disabled people to independent living may be at risk from cumulative impact of the current reforms. Even though the UK ratified the UN Convention in 2009 with cross-party support, the government is unable to demonstrate that sufficient regard is being paid to the Convention and the development of policy with direct relevance to the lives of disabled people. The right to independent living in UK law may need to be strengthened further, and we call on the government and other interested organisations to consider the need for a freestanding right to independent living in UK law." This, I believe, is how we can move forward with independent living, ensuring that it is enshrined in our British law as a direct right, just as Article 19 of the UN Convention specifies. Our other strength for the future, as has been already mentioned here today, is with ourselves, the independent living movement. We have had a strong and united voice since its beginning. We have to set this alight again in order to achieve our right to independent living. We cannot go backwards and lose our main gains. We won't go backwards. This is why Spectrum has such an important role to play, guiding us forward in this as one of the leading independent living organisations in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, John. I think that was a very good start to the session, and very useful, build on the past and invent the future, basically, isn't it? And that's what we've got to be doing, and the anomalies are quite weird in respect of what we seem to be losing. If we can move to our next panel member, Ruth Dixon. Ruth is the Hampshire County Council Adult Services Deputy Director with responsibility for care and commissioning.
I'm not going to say a great deal more to what I've already said. Just to say, my brief was to now talk about the next 30 years. It's hard to think in terms of 30 years, but certainly I think the challenges of today are real and frightening. But the solution to that, I absolutely believe, is a further empowerment of the voice of disabled people, and a need to continue to innovate. We need to continue to think about what new and different ways of creating independent living can be established. And I'm a big believer that I think a lot of the solutions do sit outside local government, and that is the way forward, particularly looking at the continued development of organisations and centres of independent living, other user-led organisations, and the development of peer support in the community, I think are absolutely critical. That's all I really want to say.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you, Ruth. Now, next down the line we have Helen Woodland. We haven't met Helen yet today. She is the Director for Adult Social Care at Southampton City Council. It's lovely to have you on the panel, Helen. Perhaps you'd like to just give us your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd also like to say I'm really delighted to be asked to speak here today. And I'm also delighted that I've been given a promotion. I'm actually the interim head of adult services, but that's fine. I'm not going to add a huge amount more or different to what my previous panellists have said. When I was asked to give a short introduction, I suppose, to the question time, I thought a bit about what I've been asked to comment on, which is, the future. And inevitably, I suppose, before I did that, I thought back to the past. And I think today has been a really wonderful celebration of what we have already achieved. And it's absolutely right that we focus on that, and we focus on all the good progress that has been made, and that we're very clear about all of the difficult challenges that are to come. I suppose my perspective is slightly around also us being honest about how far we've come and how much further we should have come. So what I suppose I would like to say is that there's a challenge there, both in terms of the difficult financial climate we face, but building on all of the things that we talked about today, and the importance of this being owned and managed and developed in partnership and shared as a challenge, but also us thinking about, have we gone far enough? Have we been radical enough? And when we're facing these difficult challenges, actually, do we need to be less risk averse and more radical to get us where we need to be and get round some of those difficult financial challenges that we face? And that's all really I want to pose at the moment.
Thank you very much, Helen. That sounds like a feisty talk. Very good. Thank you. And now we have our next panel member, who is Sandra Jerrim, I think also known as Sandy. Am I right? And Sandy is a senior commissioner in the integrated commissioning unit. So you're straddling social services and health. So welcome to the panel, and perhaps we could just have your presentation.
Hello. It is a pleasure to be here and to speak to you all, and to hear the views that are coming up so far, and I'm quite looking forward to the question time ahead, I think, anyway. I am here with a more health perspective, and that's the perspective I was asked to bring to the front of the table. And I think it's worth thinking about where we are with health at the moment in terms of this agenda. And there's certainly politically a big push now for something called integration. I think it's like independent living movement. The integration movement's been around for as many years, I think, and as yet still unsuccessful. There is perhaps a big push on that happening through something called the Better Care Fund at the moment. But it is seeking to pull together both the agendas of health and social, and to put the person at the centre. And with that comes a real drive for that person-centred approach and a big increase in the use of personalisation. So it does present us in the next 30 years, if not 10 or 5 or 1 year, to really look at how we bring personalisation together across health and social care. And like our social care partners in the city, our health side has been quite pioneer. It was some of the early pilots in bringing in personal health budgets around continuing healthcare, and did take on one of those really difficult subjects, and has brought in personal health budgets within the substance misuse field, in particular alcohol detoxes. But it runs the risk in the same way that if it sits on its laurels, it'll start to drag behind and not actually take it forward. So in the next sort of few years ahead, our challenge is, how do we bring that together and actually take that challenging journey together on an integrated route around personalisation? That's going to be quite a challenge, not only for the system, but for the people who work in it, the professionals. So I think the health system is much more adhered to doing and being in control and asking what's the matter with you, not what matters to you. And I think that's going to be the challenge. But just equally challenging is how individuals are going to have to change as well. And as much as we're going to look to the health system to change and how they respond and work with people in a person-centred way, the years ahead are actually going to ask something different of us. We're going to be asked to be active participants in our health and social care. Words like self-management, shared decision-making, becoming informed participants are going to become ever more present. And I think that's been easier in the social care setting, not easy, but easier, because I think there is more movement in the social care to be active participants. I think I look at certainly my elderly mother-in-law who goes to her doctor and expects her doctor to tell her what's wrong and give her all the advice. It's going to be much harder when I get to her age to make sure I have the information, that I go and I can be an active participant. So I think as we move down that road, as we go forward around independent living, it's going to be a challenge in the health environment to not only work in an integrated way and hopefully a seamless way, but also for the professionals and the individuals in that system.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I think we've got plenty of people here today who can certainly help you with the proactive thing. I don't think you've got any trouble there. Thank you for that. And last but not least, absolutely not least, Simon Stevens. Oh, I beg your pardon. Somebody. Sorry, Robert.
Okay.
You're going to be last but not least. Simon Stevens. You may recognise Simon from the telly. He was star of the phenomenally funny I Spasticus, and it was a hoot. I don't know if any of you saw that, but I did. It was great. So, Simon describes himself as a leading independent disability issues consultant, trainer, and he's a controversial inclusion activist. So, we expect interesting things from you, Simon. Welcome to the panel, and perhaps you'd like to give your speech.
I am delighted to be one of the guest speakers at this important event. This has given me an opportunity to ponder the achievements in independent living over the last 30 years. 30 years ago, I was just 10 years old and a pupil at the nearest physically handicapped unit attached to a mainstream school. My natural ambition had been duly recognized, and I did a lot of studying at my own higher place to other pupils, oddly from American textbooks and maths questions from Countdown. The foundations to go to mainstream school were being laid down, which was a very big thing for everyone at this time. It can be argued that over my next 30 years, I have directly benefited from the advances in the liberation of disabled people and the growth of independent living in terms of all 12 of my needs. Independent living is far more than not living in residential care or having a personal assistant, although it is indeed helpful. For me, independent living is about inclusion, self-autonomy, and the ability to take responsibility as a true citizen. I fear the last point is not taken seriously by a lot of disabled people, especially in the last few years, which has empowered a welfare lobby to frame disabled people as vulnerable recipients of state charity. This is clearly not helpful, and while independent living is strong as ever on the ground, the politicians with influence have lost the message. I feel the older generation in disabled people in terms of experience have a duty to be a beacon in supporting the newer generation about the social motto and the power of independent living, so it can continue to grow. I've always been an optimist, probably a coping mechanism I have always needed, and so I feel emotionally rich when I see what has been achieved over the last 30 years. I can now use every bus in my home city of Coventry as a wheelchair user, where 30 years ago this was impossible. I am now holding technology in my hand that can be more than what could ever be imagined possible in 1984. With the internet, my lifelong semi-serious ambition of world domination is actually possible in many ways, even if it is not obvious. But my point is, technology has given me a voice, one of many voices, in a way we now take for granted. While I was too young to be at the start of the independent living movement, I am proud to know many of those who were there, like John Evans and Jane Campion, and hopefully consider them friends, even when we don't always agree on issues. I have been a part of the generation of change, opening doors and fighting battles in the hope those who come after me will not adieu. Sadly, this is not always how it works. and I feel the current problems myself and others are experiencing with access to work shows sometimes we can risk going backwards. I have found securing independent living, with all the organisations an individual may need to work with to do this, is very much like a game of snakes and ladders. For years you may have a great support system in place and then suddenly something goes wrong and you end up back down at the start because of a change of circumstances, a changeover of organisation's staff, or a policy change. When for many of us, our independent living is a lifetime commitment without pay or holidays, and I have hopefully another 40 years to go, we need to make it future-proof, and government policy is currently a long way from being that. In conclusion, it is great to be celebrating what the independent living movement has achieved in the last 30 years, and I look forward to talking in 2044 about what has been achieved in the last 60 years.
Thanks very much, Simon. That was great. Welcome to the panel. And now, last but not least, Robert Joy. Robert works for Spectrum, and he's the chair of the Personalisation Expert Panel. So, Robert, would you like to give us your presentation?
Right, hello everybody. It's an interesting time to reflect on the future of independent living. I very much believe we are at an important crossroads where we can either move forward toward greater equality and human rights for disabled people, or we will go backward to an era of institutionalisation and relying on charity. Over the last 30 years, disabled people have fought for our right to live independently, and over the past 5 years, chairing the Personalisation Expert Panel, we have been promoting the benefit of co-production and personalisation. Unfortunately, it appears that our politicians are not so supportive. Last week, both politicians from both the major political parties were decidedly lukewarm about personal budget moving forward. Independent living is barely mentioned in the Youth Care Act. The imminent closure of the Independent Living Fund, along with welfare reform, has made many disabled people uneasy over what the future holds. With all this doom and gloom, it would be easy to give up. But out of all this negativity, we have seen a new passion and activism from a new generation of disabled people. Where we once chained ourselves to bucking or covered ourselves in paint, now we are using the power of Twitter, Facebook and blogging to raise our issues and make sure our voice is heard. This has allowed us much greater opportunity to communicate effectively with politicians and the media, something that was not possible in the past. I have great optimism for the future. An event like this, where disabled people can come together with their allies, will help us keep the message of independent living alive for decades to come.
Thank you so much, Robert. I'm sorry for putting you out there at the beginning, but apologies. In the words of the great David Dimbleby, ladies and gentlemen, this is your panel.